She was thrown out of the dealership for being too poor, but the next day, the roar of a Rolls-Royce shattered their arrogance forever. A young black girl walked into a luxury dealership, her heart racing with hope, her eyes full of dreams, but instead of respect, she was met with sneers, laughter, and cruel words. Humiliated, she left in tears. What no one knew was that her father, the billionaire they had mocked without realizing, was about to change everything. Amara had saved for months to buy her first used car, but she walked into the dealership dressed in simple clothes. The salesman looked her up and down, smirked and said, "Sweetheart, these cars aren't for people like you." The room erupted in cruel laughter. Her cheeks burned, her voice cracked, but she walked away in silence, clutching her bag to hide her tears. She didn't want them to see her breaking. She didn't want to give them that satisfaction. But once she stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun, her vision blurred and her legs felt weak. The sound of her own footsteps echoed against the pavement as she hurried away, each step heavy with shame. Her heart pounded, not only from humiliation but from the painful reminder that no matter how hard she worked, there were people in the world who would always try to make her feel small. For weeks, Amara had worked double shifts at the small cafe where she was a waitress. She had skipped outings with her friends, chosen second-hand clothes over new ones, and carried her meals in packed containers to save every possible dollar. She wasn't looking for luxury, she wasn't asking for extravagance. All she wanted was a reliable used car so she wouldn't have to take 2 buses and a train every day just to get to work and school. She had researched dealerships, compared prices, and thought she had found the one place that would treat her fairly. But she had been wrong. The way the salesman's words had cut into her, the way the laughter of strangers had chased her out the door, it lingered like a weight on her chest. She had always known that being a young black woman meant she would sometimes be underestimated, dismissed, or judged unfairly. But nothing prepared her for the cruelty of that moment. It wasn't just rejection, it was humiliation dressed up as entertainment. They didn't just deny her service, they turned her into a joke. By the time she got home to the small apartment she shared with her cousin, her face was streaked with tears. She collapsed onto her bed, clutching her pillow. For a long time, she stayed there in silence, letting the ache sink deep into her bones. But as the hours passed, sadness shifted into something else, anger. Not the kind that destroyed, but the kind that burned quietly, reminding her that she deserved better. She remembered the way her late mother used to hold her face in her hands and whisper, "Never let anyone make you feel small. You carry greatness in your blood." Those words echoed in her mind that night as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mother had always believed in her, even when life seemed stacked against them. Amara remembered the nights her mother worked late, coming home exhausted but still asking about her day, still encouraging her to dream bigger than the walls of their neighborhood. Her mother had passed away years ago, leaving Amara to figure out much of life on her own, but her spirit lived on in those words. What the people at that dealership didn't know was that Amara wasn't just any girl. Behind her quiet determination was a family history that stretched farther than anyone could guess. Her father, though absent for much of her childhood, was a man of immense power and wealth, a billionaire who lived far away in a world of high walls, private jets, and luxury cars. Amara had grown up without flaunting that connection. She rarely even spoke of it, not because she was ashamed, but because she wanted to build a life with her own hands. She wanted people to see her as Amara, not as the daughter of a man whose name alone could open doors. Still, her father cared. Though their relationship was complicated and marked by distance, he had always made sure she was safe, always made sure she had enough to live on, even when she refused most of his offers of financial help. But when he called that evening to check in, as he often did, he heard something in her voice that stopped him cold. She tried to hide it, tried to mask her pain with casual words, but he knew his daughter too well. "What happened, Amara?" he asked gently. "Nothing," she whispered. "It's fine. Your voice says otherwise," he replied. "Tell me." There was a long pause. She almost let it go, almost swallowed the story and kept it hidden like so many other struggles. But something in her father's tone of softness mixed with steel made her exhale the truth. She told him everything. The saving, the dreaming, the cruel laughter. She told him about the way she walked out feeling like nothing. When she finished, silence filled the line. For a moment she thought the call had dropped. Then she heard her father's voice, low and firm. "They will regret that," he said. "Dad, it's not they will regret it," he repeated, more softly this time. "No one humiliates my daughter." The next morning, the dealership was alive with its usual bustle. Salesmen in sharp suits moved between gleaming cars, their voices carrying the practiced tones of persuasion. Customers wandered, admiring polished metal and leather interiors. The air smelled of wax, rubber, and expensive cologne. No one suspected that anything unusual would happen. Then came the sound. A deep, commanding purr that grew louder as it approached. Heads turned, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Slowly, like royalty entering a kingdom, a Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the front entrance. Its presence alone seemed to shift the atmosphere. The polished black body gleamed under the sun, its silver grille catching the light like a crown. Every salesman in the showroom rushed forward, smiles plastered on their faces. Important customers were rare, but this was different. A Rolls-Royce wasn't just a car, it was a statement. Whoever owned it belonged to a world they could only dream of touching. The driver's door opened, and a tall, dignified man stepped out. His suit was cut to perfection, his posture commanding without effort. His eyes scanned the dealership with the calm authority of someone used to owning everything he surveyed. The salesmen stumbled over themselves to greet him, tripping over compliments and offers of service. But then the rear door opened, and out stepped Amara. Her heart raced, but she held her head high. Gone was the girl who walked away in tears the day before. Standing beside her father, she looked different not because of what she wore, but because of the dignity that radiated from her presence. The same salesmen who had mocked her less than 24 hours ago now froze in stunned silence. Their smirks evaporated, replaced by pale shock. Her father's gaze swept over them, lingering on the man who had first spoken those cruel words. He said nothing for a moment, letting the silence sink like a weight over the room. Then he spoke, his voice calm but carrying the sharpness of a blade. "Yesterday, my daughter came here to buy a car," he said. "She was laughed at, mocked, humiliated. Tell me, is this how you treat your customers?" The salesman stammered, his words tangled in panic. I didn't know. I thought you thought she was beneath you." Her father cut in smoothly. "Because of her clothes. Because of your arrogance. You measured her worth by appearances and found her lacking. Today, I will measure you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek leather folder and laid it on the nearest counter. Inside were documents that made the manager's jaw drop. "As of this morning," Amara's father continued, "this dealership belongs to me." Gasps filled the room. Salesmen shifted uncomfortably. Customers whispered in disbelief. The man who had mocked Amara turned pale, his lips trembling. Her father turned to his daughter, his expression softening. "This place is yours now, Amara. Run it, change it, make it into something better than what they showed you." Tears filled her eyes, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from pride, from vindication, from love. She stood taller, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because her father had reminded her of something she almost forgot, that her worth had never depended on their approval. The salesman who had mocked her lowered his head, shame burning his face. No laughter echoed this time, only silence. A silence filled with a lesson none of them would forget. Amara placed her hand on the counter, steady and calm. "No one," she said softly, her voice carrying across the room, "should ever be treated the way I was treated. Not here, not anywhere. Dignity is not a luxury, it's a right." And in that moment, the room shifted. She was no longer the girl who walked out in tears. She was the woman who walked back in, carrying not just her father's wealth but her own unshakable strength. The dealership would never be the same again. Neither would she. The next morning, the dealership buzzed with business until the deep purr of a Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up. Men in suits rushed to greet the mysterious billionaire stepping out, and then the door opened again. Amara stepped out first. The same girl they had mocked, now walking with her father, a man whose fortune dwarfed their arrogance. The air inside the dealership shifted instantly, as if gravity itself had changed. Yesterday, they had laughed at her. Today they could barely breathe. Amara's simple dress swayed softly with her steps, but what truly caught their eyes was her poise, her calm defiance. She didn't come back hunched or humiliated. She came back with a quiet fire in her chest, walking not behind her father but beside him. The laughter that had stung her yesterday echoed in her mind, but now it only fueled her resolve. Her father, Elias Harrington, was a man who rarely needed to raise his voice. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his silver tie glinting against his charcoal suit. His presence carried power in ways no flashy display could match. Every glance he gave seemed deliberate, like the gaze of someone who had built empires and destroyed arrogance with a single decision. The employees knew him, or at least they knew of him. He was the kind of name that circulated in whispers, rumors of billion-dollar deals, international holdings, and a fortune so vast that it bent the will of entire industries. But no one expected him to arrive here, in this small dealership, tucked away on a quiet street, where employees thought they could treat people however they pleased without consequence. The manager, a heavy-set man with a thinning hairline, scrambled forward with a forced smile plastered across his face. "Mr. Harrington," he stammered, extending a sweaty hand. "What an honor to have you here." We didn't know." Elias didn't take the man's hand. Instead, his eyes moved slowly across the room until they landed on the salesman from the day before. The man shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening, his smirk from yesterday long gone. He looked at Amara for a fleeting second and then quickly looked away, as though her very presence reminded him of the ugliness of his own words. Amara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she stood tall. This was not the girl who left in tears. This was a woman who had returned to reclaim her dignity. She glanced at her father, who gave her a small nod, silently urging her to speak if she wished, but she didn't, not yet. The silence was enough. The silence made them squirm. "Yesterday," Elias said finally, his voice calm but edged with steel, "my daughter came here with hope in her heart. She came here prepared to spend the money she worked hard to save. Instead of treating her with respect, you mocked her. You judged her by the clothes she wore, the bag she carried, and the skin she wears with pride. You laughed at her tears. The manager swallowed hard, glancing nervously at the other employees. Sir, I assure you, there must have been some misunderstanding. We would never. Elias raised a hand, and the manager fell silent instantly. I don't care for excuses, he said. I care for the truth, and the truth is standing right here beside me. He looked at Amara, his expression softening, his hand briefly resting on her shoulder. She deserves more than what she was given yesterday. She deserves dignity, and you will learn that lesson today. The salesman from yesterday finally found his voice, though it trembled. Sir, I didn't know she was your daughter. Elias turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. So it would have been acceptable to treat her that way if she weren't my daughter. His words sliced through the air like glass. The salesman opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. His face reddened, his throat worked, but he couldn't form a single word under the billionaire's stare. Amara's heart pounded, but this time it wasn't from shame. It was from vindication. She had replayed yesterday's cruelty over and over in her mind, the sting of humiliation burning every time. But now, seeing them stutter and pale under her father's gaze, she felt a strange release. She had always believed that dignity wasn't about wealth or status, it was about being seen as human, as worthy. And here she was, standing in the same space where she had been treated like less than nothing, now being given the space to reclaim her voice. Her father walked past the trembling employees and placed a leather folder on the front desk. The manager, still sweating, opened it with shaky hands. His eyes widened as he skimmed the documents, his mouth falling open. It was the kind of paperwork no one could mistake: the transfer of ownership, signed, sealed, and finalized. The dealership, effective immediately, belonged to Elias Harrington. The room erupted into whispers. Salesmen exchanged glances of disbelief, customers gaped, and the staff began shifting uneasily, uncertain of what this meant for their futures. Elias spoke again, his tone colder now. As of this morning, this dealership is mine, and as of this moment, my daughter is in charge. If you want to keep your jobs, you will learn to treat every person who walks through those doors with respect, not because of the money they may or may not have, not because of the connections they may or may not hold, but because respect is the bare minimum of human decency. The words hung in the air, heavy, unshakable. Amara stepped forward. Her palms trembled slightly, but she steadied them, placing her hand firmly on the counter. She looked at the salesman who had mocked her. His face was pale, his lips pressed into a tight line. He looked like a man who wished he could vanish. You told me, Amara said, her voice clear and steady, that these cars weren't for people like me. You laughed when I left, as though my dreams were a joke, but my worth was never measured by the price of a car. My worth isn't for you or anyone else here to decide. Her words silenced the whispers. Everyone in the room turned to her now, listening not out of obligation but because they couldn't look away. She was no longer the girl with tears in her eyes. She was a woman commanding the room. Her father looked at her with pride but said nothing, letting her take the moment for herself. Amara's gaze swept across the room. From now on, this dealership will not be a place of arrogance and mockery. It will be a place where people are treated with dignity, whether they come in wearing a designer suit or a worn-out sweater, whether they drive away in a Rolls-Royce or a used sedan. Everyone matters, and if anyone here thinks otherwise, there's the door. The silence that followed was thick and charged. A few of the employees shifted, some embarrassed, some ashamed, others humbled. One young salesman near the back, who hadn't joined in the laughter yesterday but had also stayed silent, lowered his eyes, guilt etched into his features. He looked at Amara as though he wanted to apologize, but he couldn't find the courage. The salesman who had mocked her finally whispered, I'm sorry. His voice cracked, but whether from genuine remorse or fear for his job, no one could tell. Amara didn't flinch. Your apology doesn't erase what you did, but maybe it can be the beginning of something better if you choose to change. Her father turned then, his gaze sweeping the room one last time. This is not about power, it's not about wealth, it's about respect. Remember that. Forget it, and you will answer to me. And with that, he handed the keys of the dealership to Amara, placing them in her hand with quiet reverence. She stared down at them for a long moment, her throat tight, her heart swelling. Not because of the building, not because of the title, but because in this moment she realized something she had always known deep down. Her father didn't just want to protect her, he wanted to empower her. He wanted her to know that her voice mattered, that she could shape the world around her. As customers began to leave, whispering about the extraordinary scene they had just witnessed, Amara stood in the center of the showroom. The same floor where she had once been humiliated now belonged to her. She thought of her mother, of the nights she had whispered encouragement, of the dreams she had planted in Amara's heart. She thought of the younger version of herself who had walked out in tears, believing she wasn't enough. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew that dignity could not be given or taken away, it had to be claimed. And today, she claimed it. Outside, the Rolls-Royce Phantom gleamed in the sunlight, waiting patiently. But Amara didn't need to ride in it to know her worth. She didn't need luxury to validate her existence. What she needed, she had already found: her voice, her strength, her pride. The dealership would go on. The employees would change, or they would leave. But the lesson of that day would linger long after the murmurs died down. The girl they once mocked had returned, not just as a billionaire's daughter, but as a force they would never forget. And for the first time in a long while, Amara smiled, not out of relief, not out of victory, but out of the quiet knowledge that she had turned her pain into power, her humiliation into honor. Her journey wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Her father looked the salesman in the eyes and said calmly, "Yesterday, you told my daughter she wasn't worthy. Today, I buy this dealership not for cars, but for her dignity." Silence fell. The men who had laughed now bowed their heads in shame. Amara smiled through tears. What had once been humiliation had become justice, proof that worth is never measured by appearances. The air in the showroom was thick with disbelief. Every tick of the wall clock echoed like thunder in the ears of the salesmen, who now stood stiffly, their polished shoes suddenly feeling like they were nailed to the floor. Yesterday they had felt powerful with their laughter, dismissing a girl they thought insignificant. But today, their arrogance had collapsed beneath the weight of truth, and they were left standing small, stripped of their superiority. Amara's father, Elias Harrington, didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His tone carried the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades building empires, of someone whose decisions shifted markets and whose signature could decide the fate of entire corporations. But here, in this dealership, his words weren't about wealth or power. They were about respect, something money could never buy, but something arrogance could so easily destroy. The salesman who had mocked Amara yesterday felt his throat tightened. His face turned pale, his hands fidgeting with the pen in his pocket. He wanted to say something, anything, but every excuse he thought of sounded pitiful in his own head. He remembered the way he had smirked at her, the way he had let his colleagues laugh as she walked out, shoulders hunched, cheeks burning. It had seemed funny then. Now the memory burned like acid. He saw her standing there, her tears replaced by pride, and he realized the truth. He had not mocked a poor girl, he had mocked a person whose spirit was stronger than his shallow judgment. Amara looked at him now, her eyes glistening with tears that no longer came from pain. She didn't need to say much. Her silence spoke volumes. She remembered the way her chest had tightened when she left the dealership the day before, holding back sobs until she was out of sight. She remembered the feeling of rejection pressing into her bones like a cruel weight. And now, she stood in the same place, her father's hand lightly resting on her shoulder, and she felt the weight lift. The manager, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Harrington, we never intended." Elias's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. "Do not finish that sentence. You did intend it. Maybe not with malice, but with ignorance, and ignorance has consequences." The manager fell silent, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Around them, the customers who had witnessed the scene remained frozen, torn between awe and shame, some whispering to one another about the billionaire and his daughter. A few of them, especially those who had chuckled along with the salesman yesterday, couldn't meet Amara's eyes. Elias turned his attention back to his daughter. "This is your moment, Amara," he said softly, though the words carried to every corner of the room. "You decide what happens here. What justice looks like." Amara's breath caught. For so long she had dreamed of a moment where she wasn't dismissed, where her voice mattered. She had never imagined it would come like this, with her father buying an entire dealership for her dignity. Yet here she was, and everyone was waiting for her to speak. She thought of her mother then, of her gentle voice, her lessons about resilience, her insistence that Amara's worth was unshakable no matter who tried to deny it. Her mother had always told her, "The world will try to shrink you. Don't let it." Amara stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice was steady when it came. "Yesterday, you decided I wasn't good enough," she said, looking directly at the salesman. "You laughed at me, and for a moment I almost believed your laughter. I almost believed that I didn't belong here. But I realize now, my worth doesn't come from your approval. It never did." The salesman lowered his head, shame coloring his cheeks. His colleagues stared at the ground, their polished shoes reflecting their regret. Amara turned to the entire room. "This place, from today, is going to change, not because it's now owned by my father, but because no one else will ever walk in here and leave feeling the way I did yesterday. No one will be mocked for how they look, or what they wear, or what you assume they can afford. This will be a place where people are treated like people, not price tags." There was silence again, but this silence was different. It wasn't heavy with shame, but with reflection. Some of the younger staff members shifted uncomfortably, guilt on their faces, not because they had joined in the laughter, but because they had stayed silent when cruelty unfolded in front of them. They had chosen the safety of inaction over the courage of decency. And Amara's words cut through that silence, forcing them to confront it. One of the junior salesmen, a boy barely older than Amara, finally stepped forward. His voice shook. "Miss Harrington," he said, I should have spoken yesterday. I saw what happened, and I knew it was wrong, but I didn't say anything. I'm sorry." Amara studied him for a moment. He looked sincere, his eyes wide with regret. She nodded slowly. Silence can hurt as much as cruelty, but recognizing it is the first step to change. Her father's hand tightened on her shoulder, a silent gesture of pride. Elias turned back to the salesman who had been the loudest yesterday. Do you see now what your arrogance has cost you? Yesterday you thought you were above her. Today you bow your head in her presence. Wealth, power, these things are fleeting, but character lasts, and yours has been measured and found lacking. The salesman nodded miserably, unable to meet Amara's eyes. Amara exhaled slowly, her tears finally falling, though they came not from pain but from release. Yesterday she had carried the weight of humiliation. Today, that weight dissolved into justice. It wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration, about taking back what had been stolen from her. Her dignity. Her father's words still rang in the air. Not for cars, but for her dignity. And she realized that dignity was worth more than any car, more than any building, more than any sum of money. Dignity was the one thing no one had the right to strip away. The customers began to applaud quietly, not out of politeness but out of genuine respect. A few even approached Amara, offering words of encouragement, telling her she was brave, that she had inspired them. She accepted their words with humility, but inside, her heart was racing with a new sense of purpose. Later, as the employees dispersed to process the shock of the morning, Amara walked through the dealership slowly, her fingers brushing over the polished hoods of the cars that gleamed beneath the bright showroom lights. She remembered how she had walked among these same cars yesterday, full of hope but crushed by shame. And now, the space felt different not because it had changed, but because she had. Her father joined her, his steps calm and steady. Do you feel better? He asked gently. Amara nodded, her throat tightening with emotion. Yes, not because you bought it, but because I stood up, I said what I needed to say. Elias smiled faintly, his eyes soft. That's all I ever wanted for you, Amara, to know that your voice has power, to know that you never have to shrink for anyone. She leaned against him, resting her head briefly on his shoulder. Thank you, Dad, not just for this, but for believing me, for not letting them take that moment away from me. He kissed the top of her head, his voice low. It was never theirs to take. As they left the dealership together, the Rolls-Royce gleaming in the sunlight, Amara felt a strange calm settle over her. The pain of yesterday no longer haunted hurt had transformed into strength. She knew life would bring more moments like this, where people judged her by appearances, where ignorance tried to diminish her worth, but she also knew she would never again let their laughter define her, because dignity, once reclaimed, could never be stolen again. And as the car door closed and the world outside blurred past the window, Amara smiled through her tears, carrying with her the unshakable truth her father had carved into that moment. Worth is not measured by appearances but by the strength of one's spirit. It was a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life.